Welcome back to Network Africa. Now, you recall we brought you news about a break-in in Uganda. I'll just refresh your memory. Yesterday, two legal representatives of former Uganda Prime Minister and opposition leader Madam Mbabazi reported that both of the offices were burgled 2 nights ago and that evidence which would support their case in the Supreme Court was stolen in the process. The incident appears to be one which specifically targeted the evidence based on the items which were allegedly stolen, including laptops, computers, and various documents containing affidavits of witnesses to the alleged electoral fraud in the country's February 18 national poll. Fast forward to what's happening today. Mr. Mbabazi is accusing police who are investigating the incident of actually being behind it. According to him, witnesses saw at least 4 men in both police and military uniform and civilian clothing break into the law offices. Apart from the above, Mbabazi is also accusing the police of arresting his supporters and potential witnesses. Here's an excerpt of the statement made by Mr. Mbabazi. He says here, first of all, it meant that we were not able to meet the Supreme Court deadline of filing the evidence today, and although we will be going there Thursday for a conferencing meeting, it will be very clear that we would have failed to meet that deadline because the evidence has been taken away by the police. Well, we're going to look at other security matters now regarding what's happening in Nigeria. Now, we're looking at what's going on in Nigeria regarding the Boko Haram insurgency. The Senate has confirmed that fleeing members of the sect have successfully infiltrated other towns and villages in Taraba State in north-central Nigeria. As a result, the Senate is calling on the federal government to call on security chiefs to deploy security in Taraba State to stop the killings and get the insurgents out of the state. The Senate is also urging the federal government to initiate a complete study of the crisis in Taraba State, rehabilitate the internally displaced persons, and supervise their reintegration into their communities. This call by the Senate comes 24 hours after air bombardments by jets, fighter aircraft, and helicopter gunship of Nigerian Air Force Boko Haram terrorists to abandon their camp at Isa of Borno State. Well, we're joined on the program from London by Chidi Nwonu. He is a British Army Reserve officer and security and terrorism expert. He joins us on the show right now. Chidi, thank you very much for your time on Network Africa.
Hi, Cynthia. Nice to be on.
Thank you. Now, from an expert's point of view, do you see the air bombardments as a long-term solution? Because it's starting to come across as though we're simply going around in circles. I mean, you get the insurgents out of Borno and then they end up in Taraba. So one is left wondering which state is next.
Yes, yeah. To be honest, air bombardment is never a solution to any military problem other than in a support capacity. Using air power alone it is a force multiplier, but in fact, it's not going to be what is the decisive step. This is a ground war. We're fighting people with small arms. Using motorcycles, using horses, using pickup trucks. They will only be defeated by men on the ground. So the air bombardment can support that effort, but it will not end, the conflict.
So, based on what you're saying, what approach should we take? I mean, even if we have the case of troops on ground, is that enough? Is it a military solution that it will pay off at the end of the day?
It's a combination of many different aspects, but with the extent to which the conflict has developed, we're going to have a very military-focused solution. So the enemy needs to be defeated in the first place. We need to take the fight to Boko Haram, and that means pushing into Sambisa Forest as is happening, pushing into the Mandara Mountains, pushing into Cameroon, into Lake Chad. And then the next step after that is once you've defeated them, you need to stay in those territories and hold those territories. So you need soldiers to stay there, but you also need police. People who will live within the communities and, observe, gather intelligence, pass on information, and then if the insurgents start to, reconstruct or restructure themselves, pass on early warning and defeat them while they're still weak.
But that's another thing. How long can that weakness actually last? Because sometimes it looks as though a blow has been struck and then it's like a ripple effect. It just comes back, or like a boomerang effect, and it comes back and the attacks are more vicious. That's why we have some analysts who have been on this show, for instance, who have said that the military solution is not one that's going to give a lasting one, or the military force is not one that's going to give a lasting solution, and they're actually saying the dialogue just might be the answer. Do you belong to that school of thought?
Yes, I mean, there's nobody who has any kind of understanding of counterinsurgency who is going to exclude dialogue or is going to exclude the civil effect. But the problem we have in our particular conflict in northeast Nigeria is that we have a problem of who to dialogue with. Boko Haram is not a one-faced organization. It's multifaceted, many different factions, many different influences. You can negotiate with one faction, but another faction will spoil it. So the negotiations will have to take place. There will have to be some sort of a disarmament process, some sort of a reintegration process for people who either join out of ideology or join out of desperation or who are just abducted. But there is an unreconcilable hardcore that needs to be defeated, and that's going to be through military efforts, and then followed, as I said, by policing and then civil efforts. Regenerating the economy. But as an addendum to that, going back to your previous point about the enemy regenerating, it also goes back to basic law and order structures that are kind of lacking in Nigeria. So things like customs, defending our borders, making sure that the borders are not porous. Making sure that people can't come back and forth without anyone knowing. It's these little basic things that we kind of have let slide in Nigeria that will help, defeat the enemy in the long term.
I'm still going to have to burst that bubble again, Chidi, because at the same time, we know this saying that goes, you shouldn't negotiate with terrorists. So even though dialogue looks like the way forward, these are not people who can necessarily be trusted. So what if dialogue fails, as we've seen happen in the past? And what if military efforts fail? Is there any other card that you reckon has not been played that we're yet to possibly explore in Nigeria regarding the fight against Boko Haram?
Well, the phrase that you don't negotiate with terrorists is very interesting, and it's something that kind of revolves more from movies than from anywhere else, because everybody negotiates with terrorists. The United States, Russia, the United Kingdom, France, everybody negotiates with terrorists because at the end of the day, you have to. Everybody has an objective. So at some point, if by negotiation you can achieve your objective, that's the key. I will give you, the experience of my service in Afghanistan. We have the greatest technology that you could imagine. We are the strongest, best trained forces. But at the end of the day, we're still negotiating with the Taliban because they have the capacity to stay in the field longer than we can. We can defeat them in every single fight, but they will come back. And it's the same thing with Boko Haram. We will defeat them militarily. This will happen. And then, as you can see now, we've gone from the large-scale enemy attacks to smaller scale, multiple suicide bombings, multiple ID attacks on roads. This is because the enemy can no longer generate enough strength to mount the large attacks it used to. At some point, they will whittle away more and more people until the irreconcilable hardcore is left behind. And then those are the people who will either have to be negotiated with or hunted down and destroyed, as happened to Osama bin Laden. So the takeaway is that it's a very long process. It's not going to be something short. It's not something that you can ever put an end date on. It's something that's going to take a long, gradual, step-by-step process.
Well, Chidi Nwonu, security expert and also British Army Reserve officer, thank you so much for joining us on Network Africa.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Well, still to come on Network Africa, we give you the latest regarding a nurse who might be guilty of kidnapping a baby as far back as 1997 when she was just 3 days old. Details in just a moment.